Was Alessandro Volta truly the man who unlocked the hidden spark of nature, or was he merely a fortunate observer who stumbled upon forces waiting to be discovered? History remembers him as the father of electricity, but behind this title lies a man of contradictions, deeply curious yet cautious, celebrated yet doubted, and immortalized by a single invention that changed the fate of humanity. To understand Volta is to question the very boundary between accident and genius, destiny and discovery. From this provocative question begins the story of Alessandro Giuseppe Antonio Anastasio Volta, a child born in Como, Italy, in 1745, who would grow to challenge the greatest thinkers of his age and illuminate the path toward the electrical era. His name lives forever in the word volt, the unit of electric potential, but his journey was far more complex than a single measure of science. It was a story of perseverance, intellectual battles, triumphs before emperors and kings, and a relentless search for the invisible forces that make our world alive. Before the voltaic pile, before the applause of Napoleon, before his name echoed across every laboratory of Europe, there was only a boy, quiet, observant, and considered a late bloomer in speech. People around him wondered, would this child ever rise to greatness, or would he remain in silence, unknown? That doubt would later fuel the paradox of Volta's life. A man underestimated at first, only to be remembered as the pioneer who taught mankind to command electricity. This is the tale of Alessandro Volta, a saga of sparks, ambition, rivalry, and the invention that lit the dawn of modern science. Alessandro Giuseppe Antonio Anastasio Volta was born on the 18th of February, 1745, in the small but culturally rich town of Como in northern Italy. At the time, Como was part of the Duchy of Milan, a region marked by shifting political control and intellectual ferment. The Enlightenment was sweeping across Europe, challenging old dogmas and celebrating reason, science, and discovery. Yet, for the Volta family, life was grounded in modest traditions and Catholic values. Alessandro's father, Filippo Volta, came from a noble but financially declining family. His mother, Maria Maddalena Inzaghi, also hailed from a respectable lineage. Though they were not impoverished, the Voltas were far from wealthy, and young Alessandro's future did not seem destined for glory. Tragedy struck early. Filippo died when Alessandro was just 7 years old, leaving the family under the care of his mother and relatives. Unlike the prodigies who astounded the world with precocious talent, Alessandro Volta was considered a late bloomer. He did not speak until the age of 4, sparking concern that he might be intellectually challenged. Neighbors whispered, relatives worried, and even his mother prayed in fear that her son might never communicate properly. But when he finally began to speak, he astonished everyone with his clarity of thought, precision of words, and memory. It was as though he had been silently observing and absorbing the world before unleashing his voice. Volta's childhood revealed the very traits that would later define his scientific genius: patience, attentiveness, and an insatiable curiosity about nature. While other children ran about in games, Alessandro often sat apart, watching the flicker of a flame, the flow of water, or the play of light on glass. He questioned the ordinary with extraordinary intensity. Why did a candle flame dance when air passed over it? Why did certain stones attract iron? Why did thunder roar across the sky? His teachers at the local Jesuit school soon recognized his brilliance. They encouraged him in Latin, philosophy, and natural philosophy, the precursor to modern science. Though his family initially expected him to enter the priesthood, Alessandro leaned toward a different calling, to understand the hidden laws of nature itself. To appreciate Volta's early life, one must also understand the age in which he grew. The mid-18th century was an era obsessed with electricity. Across Europe, scientists and amateurs alike experimented with mysterious, electrical fluids, generated by rubbing amber, silk, or glass. Sparks that leaped from fingers in dark rooms, shocks that startled curious volunteers, and the dazzling displays of static electricity became fashionable entertainments in salons and academies. The great minds of the time, Benjamin Franklin in America, Joseph Priestley in England, and Luigi Galvani in Italy, were all exploring electricity. Yet electricity was still a mystery cloaked in spectacle rather than a tool of science. No one had yet mastered a steady source of current. For Alessandro Volta, this world of sparks and enigmas was irresistible. By his teenage years, Volta had already begun correspondence with leading scientists. At the age of 18, he boldly wrote to renowned scholars, sharing his theories and asking questions that revealed both humility and audacity. His passion was so evident that even skeptics took him seriously. One of his earliest fascinations was with static electricity and Leyden jars, the primitive capacitors that could store electrical charge. Volta spent countless hours experimenting with them, carefully noting every effect, every shock, every glow of light. He was not a man of wild imagination, but of methodical precision. Where others saw curiosities, Volta saw the foundations of a new science. This period also saw him developing his first written treatises on electricity, which began circulating in scholarly circles. Even as a young man, Volta's reputation as a serious thinker was emerging. As Alessandro Volta approached his late teenage years, his path began to diverge sharply from that of his peers. While many young men in Como were expected to enter the priesthood, the military, or law, Volta's fascination with the natural world was unshakable. He spent long hours reading, experimenting, and writing his room, often littered with glass, metal scraps, wires, and notes filled with meticulous observations. What set Volta apart at this stage was not only his curiosity, but his ability to communicate science with precision and elegance. He was self-taught in several disciplines, and, in addition to Italian and Latin, he read French and some English, essential for engaging with the rapidly growing scientific literature of the Enlightenment. By the age of 18, Volta was already corresponding with leading scholars in Italy and abroad, offering insights and asking probing questions that revealed a maturity beyond his years. In 1769, at the age of 24, Volta published his first scientific paper, De vi attractiva ignis electrici ac phenomenis independentibus, on the attractive force of electrical fire and the phenomena dependent on it. This treatise demonstrated his deep understanding of static electricity and his ability to interpret its behavior with clarity. With this work, Volta stepped onto the stage of European science, no longer a provincial experimenter, but a man to be taken seriously. During this period, Volta became fascinated with the Leyden jar, the glass vessel that could store static electricity. It was one of the most dramatic inventions of the early electrical age, a simple jar that could produce shocks strong enough to make people leap from their chairs. But Volta was not satisfied with the spectacle. He wanted to understand why the jar worked. In his experiments, he explored how materials influenced electrical storage, the behavior of charges, and the potential to use electricity for practical ends. Unlike many electricians of his time, who used sparks mainly for amusement in salons and public shows, Volta was determined to make electricity a science, not a circus act. One of Volta's earliest and most important inventions came in 1775, the electrophorus. This device, composed of a metal plate and a resin disc, could produce endless charges of static electricity with just a simple touch. The genius of the electrophorus lay in its simplicity and reproducibility. Unlike earlier devices, it could generate charge repeatedly without having to be rebuilt or recharged from scratch. The electrophorus was quickly adopted across Europe, praised for its efficiency and accessibility. It became a common laboratory tool for generating static electricity, and Volta's name spread rapidly through the scientific world. This invention was a clear signal. Volta was not just a thinker, but a creator capable of turning ideas into practical instruments. By his late 20s, Volta's reputation had reached beyond Italy. His correspondence with scientists in France, Germany, and England placed him in the heart of the European Enlightenment. He was admired for his clarity, humility, and relentless pursuit of truth. In 1778, Volta was appointed professor of experimental physics at the University of Pavia, one of the leading universities in Lombardy. This was a major turning point. At Pavia, Volta found himself at the center of an intellectual hub, with students and colleagues eager to engage in the new science of electricity. His lectures drew attention not only for their content, but for their demonstrations, which combined rigorous explanation with striking visual effects. It is important to note that, unlike some of his contemporaries, Volta was not a flamboyant showman. He was a man of balance, cautious yet bold, modest yet ambitious. He believed in measured experimentation, that science should advance step by step, building upon careful evidence rather than rushing into grand theories. This temperament would later shape his rivalry with Luigi Galvani, whose bold claims about animal electricity clashed with Volta's insistence on method and clarity. For now, though, Volta was a rising star, a young professor, an inventor of ingenious devices, and a man whose name was beginning to echo in the halls of Europe's academies. By the mid-1772, Alessandro Volta had already begun to distinguish himself not only as an electrical experimenter, but as a man of broad scientific curiosity. Electricity fascinated him, yes, but he did not confine himself to a single domain. Like the polymaths of the Enlightenment, he sought to understand the world in all its hidden workings: light, air, fire, and matter itself. This wide-ranging interest led him to explore gases, a field then undergoing revolutionary transformations. Chemists across Europe, Antoine Lavoisier in France, Joseph Priestley in England, and Carl Scheele in Sweden, were unraveling the mysteries of air. They discovered that what people had long called air was not a single substance, but a mixture of gases, each with unique properties. The atmosphere was a puzzle waiting to be solved, and Volta eagerly joined the investigation. In 1776, Volta made a discovery that would cement his place among Europe's leading natural philosophers: methane gas. While visiting Lake Maggiore in northern Italy, Volta heard local tales of inflammable air bubbling up from marshes. Ever curious, he began collecting samples of this strange gas using inverted bottles submerged in the muddy waters. Bringing it back to his workshop, he performed a series of tests. When he held a flame to the gas, it ignited with a bright, startling burst, proving it was highly combustible. Volta called it aria infiammabile nativa, native inflammable air, which we now know as methane, CH4. This was not merely a curiosity. Volta immediately recognized that methane could have practical uses, from heating and lighting to experimental chemistry. His methodical studies laid the groundwork for future research on combustible gases and their role in both natural and industrial processes. To advance his gas studies, Volta invented the eudiometer, a long, sealed glass tube designed to measure the composition of gases. By introducing controlled sparks into the tube, he could ignite mixtures of hydrogen, oxygen, and methane, observing their reactions and deducing their proportions. This device was a brilliant example of Volta's genius. It combined his mastery of electricity with his chemical investigations. The eudiometer became a standard tool across Europe, allowing chemists to study gases with far greater precision than before. By the late 1772, Volta was no longer just a provincial professor in Lombardy. His discoveries and inventions had placed him firmly among the great names of science. He corresponded with Lavoisier, Priestley, and Franklin, exchanging ideas and challenging assumptions. The European Enlightenment thrived on such exchanges. Letters carried across borders became the lifeblood of discovery. Volta's reputation grew not only because of his ideas, but also because of his clarity of reasoning and honesty. He was admired as a man of balance, one who preferred cautious, step-by-step progress over sensational claim. The seeds of conflict. Galvani and animal electricity. Yet even as Volta's fame grew, so too did the seeds of his greatest scientific conflict. In Bologna, a fellow Italian scientist, Luigi Galvani, was conducting experiments that seemed to reveal something extraordinary, that electricity was inherent in living creatures. While dissecting frogs, Galvani observed that their legs twitched when struck by sparks or touched with metal instruments. He concluded that animals possessed a unique form of vital electricity coursing through their nerves and muscles. When Galvani published his findings in 1791, they caused a sensation. The idea that life itself might be powered by electricity was both thrilling and unsettling. Many scientists embraced the concept of animal electricity, and Galvani was hailed as its discoverer. But Volta was skeptical. His careful temperament led him to question whether the phenomenon was truly due to some special life force, or whether it was instead the result of ordinary physical laws. Over the next decade, this skepticism would drive Volta to some of his most brilliant experiments and to the creation of his most famous invention, the voltaic pile, the world's first true battery. By the late 18th century, Europe was buzzing with revolutionary ideas not only in science, but in politics, philosophy, and society. The French Revolution was tearing down old regimes. Industrial innovation was reshaping economies, and new discoveries in chemistry, physics, and biology were challenging centuries of tradition. In this storm of change, Alessandro Volta stood at the crossroads of two worlds, the world of spectacle and speculation, represented by Galvani and those who believed in mysterious animal forces, the world of method and precision, where Volta's instruments, devices, and logic sought to strip away mysticism and uncover universal laws. It was here, in this clash of ideas, that Volta would make the leap from respected scholar to immortal figure in the history of science. In the late 1782, across Italy, in the city of Bologna, Luigi Galvani, a respected physician and professor of anatomy, was conducting experiments with frogs. He had long been interested in the connection between nerves, muscles, and electricity. One day, by chance, his wife Lucia and assistants observed that the leg of a dissected frog twitched when touched with a scalpel near an electrical machine. Galvani began repeating and extending the experiment. He noticed that frog legs convulsed not only under direct sparks, but also when connected by metal instruments during thunderstorms or even near simple electrical devices. To him, the conclusion was clear. The animal itself contained an innate, vital electricity, a force essential to life. In 1791, Galvani published his findings in De Viribus Electricitatis, in Motu Musculari Commentarius, Commentary on the Effects of Electricity on Muscular Motion. The book caused a sensation. The idea that life was driven by an electrical essence, a mysterious, natural force, captured the imagination of scientists and laypeople alike. Many hailed Galvani as the man who had discovered the electrical foundation of biology. Volta reads with caution. When Alessandro Volta read Galvani's treatise, he was intrigued but unconvinced. Volta admired Galvani's careful dissections and his earnestness, but he found the conclusions problematic. To Volta's mind, the experiments did not prove that electricity originated inside the animal. Instead, he suspected the twitching was caused by the metals themselves. Galvani had often used two different metals, such as copper and iron joined together to touch the frog's nerve and muscle. To Volta, This was no coincidence. The metals, not the animal, were generating the current. The frog's leg was simply acting as a sensitive detector of the charge. Thus began one of the most famous debates in the history of science. Galvani: life itself contains a vital electricity. Animals produce their own electrical essence. Volta: the metals are the true source of electricity. The animal is only a conductor. The debate split Europe. Some sided with Galvani, enchanted by the possibility that electricity was the very spark of life. Others rallied to Volta, who offered a more mechanical, less mystical explanation. Volta set out to prove his theory. If metals were the true source of current, then it should be possible to generate electricity without any animal tissue at all. He began experimenting with combinations of different metals, separated by moist cloth or cardboard soaked in saline solution. Through years of careful trials, he perfected his design: alternating discs of zinc and copper, layered with pieces of cloth moistened in brine. When stacked into a column like a pile of coins, this assembly produced a steady and continuous flow of electricity. In 1800, Alessandro Volta announced his invention of the voltaic pile, the world's first true battery. This was no fleeting spark, no trick of static. For the first time in human history, scientists had access to a sustained source of current electricity. The voltaic pile could power experiments, ignite reactions, and reveal phenomena previously invisible to science. The impact was immediate and profound. Across Europe, laboratories rushed to build their own piles. Chemists discovered that passing current through water split it into hydrogen and oxygen, a process later known as electrolysis. Humphrey Davy used powerful batteries to isolate new elements like sodium and potassium. Entire fields of electrochemistry and electromagnetism opened before the astonished eyes of the scientific world, and all of it traced back to Volta's cautious doubt of Galvani's claims. The controversy had not only sharpened Volta's reasoning, but had propelled him to create a device that changed civilization. Despite their differences, history remembers both men with honor. Galvani's ideas of animal electricity were not entirely wrong. His observations laid the groundwork for modern neurophysiology and the understanding of electrical signals in nerves. Volta, however, had been correct about the metals and their role, and his battery proved the decisive breakthrough. In a sense, both rivals were right in part. Galvani revealed the connection between electricity and life, while Volta harnessed electricity as a universal physical force. Together, their work marked the dawn of a new era. Recognition and triumph. News of Volta's invention spread rapidly. It reached even Napoleon Bonaparte, then First Consul of France, who invited Volta to Paris in 1801 to demonstrate the pile before the Institut de France. The event was nothing short of triumphant. In front of some of the greatest scientists of the age, Volta showed how his simple stack of metals could produce sparks, shocks, and continuous current. Napoleon, deeply impressed, awarded Volta gold medals and made him a Count of the Kingdom of Italy. From that moment, Volta was not merely a scientist. He was a symbol of human progress, the man who had brought electricity under control. In 1800, Alessandro Volta's announcement of the voltaic pile reverberated across Europe like a thunderclap. News of his invention traveled swiftly through academic circles, reaching Paris, the beating heart of Enlightenment science, and under Napoleon Bonaparte, the center of power in continental Europe. Napoleon himself, a man deeply interested in science and its applications, saw in Volta's work not merely curiosity, but a tool of immense potential. He extended a personal invitation to Volta to come to Paris and present his discovery before the Institut de France. For Volta, this was the defining moment of his career. After decades of careful, often quiet labor, his invention had propelled him to the world stage. With meticulous preparation, he journeyed to Paris in 1801, bringing with him his instruments, his notes, and above all, the simple yet revolutionary pile of metals and cloth soaked in brine that had changed everything. The demonstration before the Institut de France. The hall was filled with some of the greatest minds of the age, scientists, philosophers, and statesmen gathered to witness what whispers were already calling a new era in natural philosophy. Napoleon himself presided over the demonstration. Volta, a man of modest demeanor, stood before the audience and calmly explained his apparatus. He stacked the discs of zinc and copper, separated by dampened cloth, and connected wires to the top and bottom of the pile. To the astonishment of the crowd, he produced a continuous, controllable flow of electricity. He ignited sparks, delivered shocks, and even demonstrated how the current could pass through chains of people, linking science to spectacle. But unlike the fleeting sparks of static machines, this was steady power, reliable, repeatable, and capable of being scaled. The hall erupted in applause. Napoleon, ever the showman, insisted on testing the pile himself, receiving a mild shock that drew laughter and awe in equal measure. More than just amused, Napoleon understood the significance. This invention was not a parlor trick, but the foundation of a new science. Impressed beyond measure, Napoleon awarded Volta with gold medals, showered him with praise, and secured his position as a Count of the Kingdom of Italy. Volta became a member of the Institut de France and was celebrated throughout Europe. The Italian professor from Como, once dismissed as a cautious experimenter, was now an international celebrity. His invention symbolized the power of reason, experiment, and human ingenuity. Almost immediately, scientists seized upon the voltaic pile to pursue discoveries that had once been impossible. Humphrey Davy in England built massive piles to perform electrolysis, splitting compounds into their elemental parts. He discovered new elements such as sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, ushering in a revolution in chemistry. William Nicholson and Anthony Carlisle used the battery to decompose water into hydrogen and oxygen, providing direct evidence for chemical composition. Physicists across Europe began probing the links between electricity and magnetism, work that would eventually culminate in Michael Faraday's groundbreaking discoveries of electromagnetic induction. The pile had unleashed an age of electrochemistry and electromagnetism, and Volta's name was forever etched into its foundation. Despite the accolades, Volta remained personally humble. He preferred the quiet of his laboratory in Pavia and the comfort of his family life to the pomp of Parisian society. Unlike some scientists intoxicated by fame, Volta never lost his focus on careful, methodical experimentation. He was deeply devoted to his wife, Teresa Peregrini, whom he married in 1794, and with whom he had 3 sons. Family life provided him balance, even as his scientific work placed him at the center of Europe's intellectual storm. Symbol of the Enlightenment, Volta's fame coincided with a Europe in transition. The Enlightenment's ideals of reason, progress, and discovery were reshaping politics, society, and science. Volta became a symbol of that spirit, a man who, through patience and logic, had transformed sparks of curiosity into the flame of discovery. For Napoleon, Volta's invention was also political. It demonstrated Europe's scientific superiority and the practical power of knowledge. For the scientific world, it was the doorway to a new frontier. For Volta himself, it was the culmination of decades of persistence, born from skepticism but guided by curiosity. By the time Volta returned to Italy, he was no longer just Alessandro Volta, the professor he was, Alessandro Volta, Count of the Kingdom of Italy, a figure celebrated by kings, emperors, and fellow scientists. The invention of the voltaic pile had guaranteed his immortality in the annals of science. But Volta's journey was not yet over. Though the pile was his crowning achievement, his later years would be marked by reflection, teaching, and the gradual decline of health that comes with age. Still, even in retirement, His name carried weight, his ideas reverberated, and his legacy only grew stronger. After the dazzling triumph in Paris and the shower of honors from Napoleon, Alessandro Volta returned home to Lombardy. The applause of emperors and academies had elevated him to international fame, but at heart, Volta remained the same modest, careful man who preferred the quiet of study to the noise of politics or spectacle. In Como and at the University of Pavia, he continued to teach and inspire students. His lectures now drew larger audiences than ever before, for to hear Volta was to stand in the presence of living history. He had proven that persistent curiosity could shape the destiny of science. As a professor, Volta was admired not only for his discoveries, but for his clarity of instruction. He had the rare ability to take the most complex phenomena and present them with simplicity and logic. Students left his classroom not merely with facts, but with a spirit of inquiry. He emphasized patience, precision, and humility in the face of nature. Science, Volta insisted, was not about rushing to grand theories, but about letting evidence guide thought. Many of his pupils carried this philosophy into their own careers, spreading the Voltaic method across Europe. Volta's fame did not diminish with time. Honors continued to flow. He was elected to academies across Europe. He received personal tributes from rulers, including Emperor Francis I of Austria. His name was spoken with reverence alongside Franklin, Lavoisier, and Priestley as one of the giants of the Enlightenment. In 1810, Napoleon himself named Volta a count and a senator of the Kingdom of Italy. This was not only recognition of his invention, but also of his service as a symbol of progress and national pride. By 1819, however, Volta's health began to decline. Years of intense experimentation and public duties had taken their toll. He retired from his professorship at Pavia, returning to Como to spend his final years in quiet reflection. He devoted himself to family life, finding comfort in his wife Teresa Peregrini and their 3 sons. Though his days of great discovery were behind him, Volta remained intellectually active, corresponding with colleagues and reflecting on the changes sweeping through science. By the 1822nd, the world Volta had helped create was blossoming. The voltaic pile had unleashed entire new fields. Chemists were using electrolysis to discover new elements. Physicists were beginning to probe the mysterious relationship between electricity and magnetism. Inventors were dreaming of practical machines powered by electrical forces. Volta lived long enough to glimpse the dawn of the electrical age, a future that would eventually bring telegraphs, lights, motors, and the global electrification of civilization. Though he could not foresee all its applications, he knew his invention had sparked something irreversible. Volta spent his last years in a villa near Como, surrounded by books, instruments, and the memories of a lifetime of discovery. Despite frailty, he remained serene, embodying the patience and humility that had guided his career. On the 5th of March, 1827, Alessandro Volta passed away at the age of 82. His death was mourned across Europe. Newspapers and academies alike paid tribute to the man who had given the world electricity in its most practical form. In Como, his hometown, citizens honored him with monuments, museums, and eventually the Tempio Voltiano, Volta Temple, built in 1927 to commemorate the centenary of his death. Even today, it stands as a shrine to his genius. Volta's name lives on in the volt, V, the unit of electric potential. Every time electricity is measured, his legacy sparks anew. He is remembered not only for a single invention, but for the spirit of inquiry he embodied, cautious, patient, yet unyielding in pursuit of truth. His rivalry with Galvani, his triumph in Paris, his discovery of methane, his invention of the electrophorus, all these moments weave together into the tapestry of a life that shaped the modern world. Alessandro Volta's story reminds us that doubt, when combined with perseverance, can be the very engine of discovery. He questioned Galvani's conclusions, and in doing so, created the battery that would light the path into the future. When Alessandro Volta first stacked his discs of zinc and copper with brine-soaked cloth, he could not have imagined the cascade of revolutions that would follow. The voltaic pile was more than an invention. It was the first doorway into controlled current electricity, transforming electricity from a fleeting curiosity into a tool of scientific investigation. For centuries, electricity had been known only as a strange force, sparks leaping from rubbed amber, lightning flashing across the sky, the mysterious twitch of a frog's leg. It was awe-inspiring, yes, but unreliable. Volta's pile changed everything by giving humanity a steady and predictable source of current. This seemingly simple column of metals became the foundation of entire scientific disciplines. Before Volta, chemistry was limited by the tools available. With the pile, suddenly new worlds opened. Electrolysis of water, 1800. Within months of Volta's announcement, William Nicholson and Anthony Carlisle in England used the pile to decompose water into hydrogen and oxygen. This experiment provided stunning proof that water was not an elemental substance, but a compound, a triumph for the emerging chemical revolution. Humphrey Davy's discoveries. Perhaps no one used Volta's invention more brilliantly than Sir Humphrey Davy. At the Royal Institution in London, Davy built enormous batteries, sometimes consisting of thousands of plates. With them, he isolated a series of new elements, sodium and potassium, 1807, extracted from caustic soda and potash, calcium, strontium, barium, and magnesium, 1808. These discoveries fundamentally reshaped the periodic table of elements. Electrochemistry born, Volta's pile gave birth to the discipline of electrochemistry, which explored how electricity could drive chemical reactions. This field would later expand into metallurgy, industrial processes, and eventually modern battery technologies. Without Volta's pile, the chemical revolution sparked by Lavoisier might have stalled. With it, it accelerated beyond imagination. The pile did not only serve chemistry, it electrified physics as well. Early studies of magnetism. Scientists soon realized that current could influence magnetic materials. This observation laid the foundation for Hans Christian Oersted's discovery in 1820 that electric currents create magnetic fields. Oersted's work directly inspired André-Marie Ampère, who formulated the laws of electromagnetism. Michael Faraday. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Volta's invention lay in its influence on Michael Faraday. In the 1822nd and 1832nd, Faraday used batteries derived from Volta's pile to conduct experiments that revealed the principles of electromagnetic induction. From this, the concept of generating electricity through motion was born, the basis of all modern power generation, from pile to generator. In a sense, Volta's humble pile was the ancestor of every dynamo, every generator, and every electrical grid in existence today. It was the first step on the path to harnessing electricity not only as a scientific tool, but as the lifeblood of civilization. The late 18th and early 19th centuries were already a time of transformation. Steam engines, mechanized factories, and rapid urban growth defined the Industrial Revolution. But Volta's invention introduced a new force into the mix: electrical energy. Though its industrial applications took time to develop, the pile was the first sign that energy need not come only from coal, wood, or water wheels. Here was a new kind of power, invisible yet potent, one that could be stored, transmitted, and manipulated. Telegraphy, lighting, electroplating, and eventually electric motors, all these applications descended from the principle Volta had unlocked. The modern world of electrification, the lights in cities, the motors in factories, the computers and smartphones of today trace their lineage back to the voltaic pile. Volta's invention was more than a scientific tool, it was a cultural symbol. At the dawn of the 19th century, Europe was torn between revolution and empire, between the old regimes and the promise of modernity. Science stood at the heart of this tension, and discoveries like Volta's pile embodied the Enlightenment's faith in human reason. To Napoleon, Volta was proof that science could glorify nations and secure power. To philosophers, he was an example of human ingenuity, unveiling nature's secrets. To ordinary citizens, the battery was a marvel that hinted at a future shaped by discovery rather than tradition. In 1881, more than half a century after his death, the International Electrical Congress in Paris honored Volta in the most fitting way possible, by naming the unit of electrical potential the volt. Every time a student measures a battery, every time an engineer calibrates a circuit, every time an appliance is rated in volts, Volta's name is spoken anew. Few scientists have achieved such universal and lasting recognition. Volta's double legacy, science and spirit. Volta's contributions endure, not just in his inventions, but in his approach to science. He was cautious yet bold, never rushing to declare sweeping theories without evidence. He was practical, inventing instruments that could be used and replicated widely. He was humble, content to let his discoveries speak louder than his fame. In this, Volta embodied the true spirit of Enlightenment science, curiosity guided by reason, invention born of patience, and discovery rooted in humility. The story of Alessandro Volta cannot be told without Luigi Galvani, his rival, and in many ways his unintentional collaborator. Their disagreement over the source of electricity sparked one of the most important scientific debates of the 18th century. Galvani's vision. Electricity was inherent in living tissue, a vital fluid coursing through the nerves and muscles of animals. His twitching frogs seemed to prove that life itself was electrical. Volta's vision. Electricity was generated by the contact of metals. The frog's leg was not producing electricity, it was merely acting as a detector of currents created by external materials. Both men stood by their claims passionately. Yet in hindsight, science recognizes that both were partly right. Galvani's experiment with frog legs became legendary. He would hang dissected frog legs from an iron railing with a copper hook. When a storm approached, the legs twitched as though alive. To observers, it seemed as though the lightning itself was animating the flesh. Volta was fascinated, but he focused on the role of the copper hook and the iron railing. To him, this was no vital force. It was the metals creating an electric current when connected through the moist tissues of the frog. Where Galvani saw life's secret spark, Volta saw physics at work. The publication of Galvani's treatise in 1791 electrified Europe quite literally. The notion that animals harbored electrical forces touched the imagination of philosophers, physicians, and poets. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, 1818, would later draw inspiration from the idea that electricity could reanimate life. Volta, however, began publishing counter-arguments, methodically dissecting Galvani's results. He repeated the frog experiments, replacing tissue with brine-soaked cloth and achieving the same results. If twitching could occur without animal tissue, then surely the electricity came from the metals. The debate raged in salons, academies, and laboratories. Was electricity the essence of life, or a universal physical phenomenon? The answer, as history would show, was both. Volta's invention of the voltaic pile in 1800 seemed to vindicate his position. By producing electricity with nothing more than zinc, copper, and brine, he proved that currents did not require living tissue. Yet Galvani's intuition was not in vain. Modern science has revealed that nerves do indeed transmit signals through electrical impulses generated by ion flows across membranes. While not the animal electricity Galvani imagined, his observations were the first window into what we now call bioelectricity. Thus, the Galvani-Volta controversy gave birth to two fields, electrochemistry and electromagnetism, thanks to Volta, neurophysiology and bioelectricity, thanks to Galvani. A single frog's twitch had split science into two great rivers of discovery. Though their debate was fierce, history paints neither man as a villain. Volta's skepticism was vital. Galvani's imagination was visionary. Both approached nature with honesty, and their clash advanced knowledge far beyond what either could achieve alone. In fact, Galvani's nephew, Giovanni Aldini, carried on the experiments, applying galvanic currents to animal and even human corpses, demonstrating muscle contractions under electric stimulation. These experiments, though macabre, foreshadowed modern medical techniques like electrotherapy and defibrillation. The Galvani-Volta rivalry stands as a reminder that science often grows not from agreement, but from productive tension. Doubt, debate, and contradiction can sharpen truth. From Volta came the mastery of electricity as a universal force. From Galvani came the insight that electricity is also the language of life. Together, their legacies echo through physics, chemistry, biology, and even literature. The frog's leg that twitched in Bologna and the pile that sparked in Pavia were not isolated curiosities, they were the twin origins of modern electrical science. When Volta unveiled his pile in 1800, Europe was already intoxicated with science. Salons in Paris, London, Vienna, and Berlin had become theaters of knowledge, where philosophers, aristocrats, and curious citizens gathered to witness the latest experiments. Electricity, with its sparks, shocks, and mysterious glow, was the perfect spectacle, but Volta's invention elevated electricity from a parlor amusement to something far greater, a force of nature that could be controlled and stored. The pile was small enough to sit on a table, yet powerful enough to split water, ignite wires, and shock the human body. To ordinary observers, it seemed like bottled lightning, the power of storms contained in human hands. The early 19th century was a time of romanticism, where poets, artists, and philosophers sought to reconcile human emotion with the grandeur of science. Electricity became a symbol of both mystery and possibility. Writers saw in it the spark of life itself. If a frog's leg could twitch under an electric jolt, what else could be animated? Painters and illustrators filled their works with images of lightning, storms, and electrical experiments, portraying electricity as the hidden fire of nature. Philosophers debated whether electricity was the soul of the universe, the ultimate key to understanding matter and life. In this climate, Volta's pile was more than an instrument, it was a metaphor for progress. No cultural reflection of electricity's power looms larger than Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, 1818. Written less than 2 decades after Volta's invention, it captured the anxieties and hopes of an age electrified by science. In Shelley's tale, Victor Frankenstein uses mysterious galvanic forces to reanimate lifeless matter, creating his infamous creature. Though Shelley never explicitly describes the use of a voltaic pile, the influence of Galvani's twitching frogs and Volta's electrical currents was unmistakable. The novel dramatized the fear and fascination electricity inspired. Could humans, armed with this new power, overstep their bounds and play God? Frankenstein's monster was not only a literary figure, it was a cultural response to the very questions Volta and Galvani had raised. Throughout the early 19th century, public demonstrations of voltaic piles drew crowds. Audiences watched in awe as wires glowed, water split, and sparks leaped. In a time before electric lights, these effects seemed almost supernatural. Scientists became performers, their laboratories doubling as stages. Electricity was both entertainment and enlightenment, showing the public that science was not confined to dusty books, but was a living, dynamic exploration of nature. Governments and rulers eagerly embraced the symbolism. Napoleon displayed Volta as proof of Europe's intellectual might. Academies across the continent treated the pile as a national treasure. To have control over electricity was to stand at the frontier of knowledge and power. By the 1822nd and 1832nd, electricity had become a cultural icon. In literature, it symbolized creation and destruction. In art, it was painted as both divine and dangerous. In philosophy, it represented the unity of matter and energy. Volta's invention had done more than ignite experiments. It had ignited the human imagination. Volta's pile was at first a marvel for scientists and philosophers, yet its power was too practical to remain a curiosity. Within a few years, inventors, experimenters, and engineers began adapting the device for real-world uses. Unlike static machines that produced fleeting sparks, the pile offered a continuous source of current, however modest. That continuity opened possibilities never before imagined. One of the earliest applications of Volta's pile was electroplating, the process of using electric current to deposit a thin layer of metal onto an object. Luigi Brugnatelli, an Italian chemist and close friend of Volta, conducted pioneering electroplating experiments in 1805. Using voltaic piles, he succeeded in coating objects with thin films of gold. This was more than scientific novelty. It hinted at industrial and artistic uses. Jewelry, tableware, and decorative objects could now be coated with precious metals at far less cost than solid gold or silver. Though Brugnatelli's work was initially suppressed, Napoleonic authorities discouraged its publication. Electroplating would later become a major industry, one of the first clear proofs that Volta's pile had economic and artistic utility. The 19th century was also an age of communication revolutions. Inventors across Europe and America realized that electricity could carry signals across distances. Early experimental telegraphs, built in the 1810-second and 1820-second, relied on batteries derived from Volta's pile to send pulses of current through wires. By mid-century, telegraph systems connected cities and continents, shrinking the world and enabling rapid communication in commerce, politics, and personal life. Though Volta did not live to see the full flowering of telegraphy, his invention was its indispensable foundation. The pile made possible the idea that information could travel faster than a horse or a ship. The pile also proved to be a tool for analyzing matter itself. Scientists discovered that passing current through liquids could split them into constituent elements. Nicholson and Carlisle's decomposition of water in 1800 was the first example, revealing hydrogen and oxygen. Soon, electrolysis became a standard method for exploring chemical compounds, confirming Lavoisier's chemical theories and expanding the list of known elements. Entire industries would eventually use electrolysis for refining metals, producing chemicals, and later generating fuels. The pile had turned electricity into a knife for cutting apart nature's building blocks. Volta himself was cautious about the medical uses of electricity, but others eagerly explored them. Galvani's legacy had already tied electricity to living tissue, and now the pile offered a controllable current to test the idea. Doctors experimented with electrotherapy, applying mild currents to patients for muscle stimulation, nerve disorders, and even psychological conditions. Though many of these early treatments were crude and often ineffective, they foreshadowed modern medical technologies such as pacemakers, defibrillators, and deep brain stimulators. Electricity was no longer only a mystery of nature, it was becoming a potential healer of the body. While the voltaic pile itself was not powerful enough to drive large machines, it planted the seed of a radical idea that electricity could one day be harnessed as a source of energy. Inventors and thinkers began asking questions. Could batteries be scaled to power lamps brighter than candles? Could electric currents replace steam in driving machines? Could electricity become not just a scientific tool, but an industrial force? These questions would not be fully answered until decades later, with Faraday's discovery of electromagnetic induction and the rise of electrical generators. But Volta's pile was the first step on that path. By the mid-19th century, it was clear. Volta's invention had shifted electricity from the realm of spectacle to the realm of utility. Scientists used it to unravel nature's secrets. Inventors adapted it for communication, plating, and analysis. Physicians tested it as a therapy. Philosophers and artists embraced it as a metaphor of progress. The voltaic pile had quietly changed the destiny of human civilization. When Alessandro Volta introduced the voltaic pile in 1800, it was revolutionary, not because of its size or strength, but because of its principle. By combining two different metals and a conductive liquid, one could produce a steady and reliable current. This simple insight became the cornerstone of 2 centuries of progress in energy storage. The pile was primitive, bulky, prone to leakage, and offering limited power. Yet it embodied the essential design of every battery since: an anode, a cathode, and an electrolyte. In 1836, John Frederick Daniell, a British chemist, improved upon Volta's pile by inventing the Daniell cell. Using copper and zinc electrodes separated by a porous barrier, Daniell's design produced a steadier current that did not degrade as quickly as Volta's original pile. This stability made it ideal for powering the early telegraph systems that began spreading across Europe and America in the mid-19th century. The Daniell cell was a direct descendant of Volta's idea, showing how his principle could be refined into a tool of global communication. In 1839, William Robert Grove developed a stronger cell using platinum and nitric acid. His Grove cell was more powerful, though it released dangerous fumes. Despite its hazards, it powered telegraphs across Europe and America, becoming a workhorse of the communication revolution. Here again, the lineage was clear. From Volta's discs to Grove's cells, electricity was steadily moving from the laboratory to the world stage. By the 1862nd, batteries were becoming smaller, safer, and more practical. Georges Leclanché introduced a cell using manganese dioxide and ammonium chloride, which became the model for the zinc-carbon dry cell. This design, commercialized in the late 19th century, powered early flashlights, doorbells, and portable devices. For the first time, electricity became portable for ordinary people. No longer confined to scientists or engineers, Volta's invention was entering everyday life. In 1859, Gaston Planté invented the lead-acid battery, the first rechargeable battery. Its ability to deliver high currents and be recharged made it ideal for industrial applications. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, lead-acid batteries were used in telecommunication systems, backup power, and eventually automobiles. Even today, lead-acid batteries remain in widespread use, another testament to Volta's legacy. As technology advanced, so did the demand for more efficient batteries. Nickel-cadmium (NICD) cells emerged in the early 20th century, offering rechargeability for smaller devices. Later, nickel metal hydride (NIMH) batteries became popular in the late 20th century, powering everything from cordless phones to early hybrid cars. Alkaline batteries, developed in the 1952nd, became the dominant disposable battery type, ubiquitous in toys, remotes, and cameras. Every one of these was a refinement of Volta's principle: 2 electrodes, 1 electrolyte, and the flow of charge between them. The most powerful descendant of Volta's pile emerged in the late 20th century: the lithium-ion battery. Developed in the 1982nd and commercialized by Sony in 1991, lithium-ion batteries offered unprecedented energy density, rechargeability, and portability. They now power nearly all modern electronics, smartphones, laptops, electric vehicles, satellites, and renewable energy storage systems. From Volta's copper and zinc to today's lithium and cobalt, the story of the battery is the story of refining a single, profound idea. When engineers design batteries today, they speak in volts, a direct homage to Alessandro Volta. Whether it is a 1.5-volt AA cell or a 400-volt electric car battery pack, every unit recalls the man who first demonstrated that electricity could be sustained, stored, and used. From a boy in Como who was slow to speak, to the count honored by Napoleon, to the name immortalized in every electrical device, Volta's legacy is woven into modern life as intimately as the current flowing through our machines. Before Volta, electricity was mysterious, fleeting, and untamed. It flickered in sparks, danced in storms, and startled the curious with shocks. After the invention of the voltaic pile, electricity became something more, a force that could be studied, measured, and mastered. Philosophers of the late Enlightenment seized upon this. Electricity, once a curiosity, became a fundamental concept in discussions of nature. If fire, water, air, and earth had once been considered the elements of the world, electricity now joined them as a symbol of unseen power woven into the fabric of existence. Volta's pile wasn't merely a device, it was proof that hidden forces could be brought under human reason. Volta lived during a time when Europe was grappling with new definitions of truth and knowledge. Religion, philosophy, and science all competed for authority. The Enlightenment ideal was that truth could be uncovered through reason, evidence, and experiment. Volta perfectly embodied this spirit. He refused to accept Galvani's conclusions without deeper testing. He insisted on instruments, precision, and reproducibility. He showed that patience and logic could unlock forces as vast as lightning itself. His pile became a metaphor of Enlightenment rationalism. Knowledge stacked layer by layer, producing a current of truth. Yet Volta's invention also flourished in the age of Romanticism, which saw in electricity not only reason but wonder. To poets, artists, and dreamers, electricity became the spark of life and imagination. Romantic poets like Coleridge and Shelley wrote of storms and sparks as symbols of creativity and divine inspiration. Artists painted lightning as the hand of God, now seemingly within the grasp of man. Writers like Mary Shelley turned Volta's current into a metaphor for the power to create life and the dangers of human ambition. Electricity was both Enlightenment's rational tool and Romanticism's fiery muse. Volta's pile also reshaped how people conceived of energy itself. Before, energy was understood through heat, motion, or muscular strength. With electricity, energy became abstract, a flow of invisible force that could drive reactions, light darkness, and animate machines. This new vision of energy would, in time, become central to physics, leading to the great unifications of the 19th century, the laws of thermodynamics, the discovery of the link between electricity and magnetism, the eventual understanding of energy as a universal, interchangeable quantity. Volta's pile was thus not only a scientific tool, but a philosophical catalyst, forcing humanity to redefine nature itself. Perhaps the most profound lesson of Volta's story lies in the power of doubt. Where others saw proof of animal electricity, Volta hesitated. Where others rushed to conclusions, Volta tested patiently. Where others accepted mystery, Volta demanded clarity. That doubt led to discovery. Volta teaches us that skepticism, far from being a weakness, can be the spark of the greatest breakthroughs. In this way, he became a symbol of the scientific mind, never fully satisfied, always probing deeper, always willing to question. Today, every time a child learns about volts, every time an engineer measures potential, every time a phone charges, Volta's name whispers through the wires. His pile was more than an invention, it was the birth of a new relationship between humans and energy. It symbolized the transition from wonder to mastery, from mystery to method, from sparks of curiosity to the blazing current of civilization. Despite the fame his discoveries brought him, Alessandro Volta remained a man of remarkable modesty. He was never a flamboyant figure like Benjamin Franklin, nor a fiery revolutionary like Antoine Lavoisier. Instead, he carried himself with quiet dignity. Even when Napoleon crowned him with medals and noble titles, Volta returned home to Como with little taste for pomp. He preferred the calm of his study, the comfort of his family, and the steady rhythm of teaching at Pavia over the glitter of Parisian salons. This humility was not weakness but strength, the strength to let his work speak louder than his name. Volta's career was not built on sudden flashes of inspiration, but on patient accumulation of knowledge. He observed carefully. He recorded meticulously. He repeated experiments until he was sure of their reliability. This temperament was key to his triumph over Galvani. Where Galvani leapt to sweeping conclusions, Volta questioned, tested, and refined until he uncovered the truth. His pile was not the product of haste, but of years of doubt transformed into discovery. Raised in Catholic Lombardy, Volta's worldview was shaped by both faith and reason. While some Enlightenment thinkers leaned toward skepticism of religion, Volta retained a devout belief in God. To him, science was not a rebellion against faith, but a way of uncovering the divine order of creation. He often spoke of electricity as one of nature's hidden gifts placed there by providence, waiting for humans to discover. His faith gave him humility. He did not see himself as the master of electricity, but as its interpreter, revealing truths that had always existed in nature. Volta's role as a professor at the University of Pavia for more than 40 years shaped his identity as much as his inventions. Students admired his clarity of thought and his ability to make difficult subjects understandable. He believed deeply in the mission of education, not merely to transfer facts, but to train the mind in the discipline of reason. His classroom was not a place of spectacle, but of method, evidence, and inquiry. Though his career demanded much, Volta cherished his personal life. In 1794, at nearly 50 years old, he married Teresa Peregrini, daughter of Count Ludovico Peregrini. Their marriage was warm and stable, producing 3 sons, Zannino, Flaminio, and Luigi. Family life grounded Volta. After long days of experiment and teaching, he returned to the comforts of home. His letters reveal a man affectionate, protective, and proud of his children. Unlike many great scientists whose personal lives suffered from obsession, Volta managed to balance discovery with devotion. Volta's temperament was a rare balance, cautious yet bold. He questioned claims carefully, yet dared to build an entirely new machine, humble yet ambitious. He sought no glory, but he pursued discoveries that reshaped the world. Religious yet rational, he reconciled faith with science, believing both sought truth in their own ways. This balance made him not only a great scientist, but also a beloved figure, respected even by rivals. When we imagine Alessandro Volta, we should not see a flamboyant genius or a reckless dreamer. We should see a man seated at a modest desk, notes spread before him, hands steady as he stacks discs of copper and zinc with patient care. A man whose curiosity never burned wildly but glowed steadily, like a lamp that never flickers. His greatness lay not in spectacle but in steadiness, and it was precisely this steadiness that gave the world its first true source of electricity. Alessandro Volta was born in 1745, when the Enlightenment was reaching its peak. Across Europe, philosophers and scientists proclaimed the triumph of reason, logic, and natural law over superstition and dogma. Volta grew up surrounded by this intellectual ferment. The Jesuit education he received in Como and later his scholarly circles in Lombardy reflected the Enlightenment's dual commitments, faith and reason, tradition and progress. He inherited its values, skepticism, rational inquiry, and a belief in universal laws and carried them into his own experiments. A thinker of the Enlightenment. In his methods, Volta was thoroughly an Enlightenment figure. He believed in orderly experimentation, where every step must be documented and reproducible. He emphasized clarity of communication, publishing treatises that were admired for their precision. He rejected speculation not grounded in evidence, a stance that made him cautious in his debates with Galvani. Volta represented the Enlightenment's conviction that truth lay hidden in nature, waiting to be uncovered by disciplined minds. But Volta also lived through the upheavals that shook Europe in his lifetime. The American Revolution, 1776, and French Revolution, 1789, redefined nations and power. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte brought both conquest and reform across the continent. The collapse of old empires and the birth of new ideas of liberty and science reshaped the world Volta knew. Through it all, Volta remained a steady presence. His demonstration of the pile before Napoleon in 1801 was not just scientific, it was political. It symbolized how science had become a tool of modern power. When Volta died in 1827, the Industrial Revolution was in full motion. Steam engines powered factories, railroads were spreading, and industry was reshaping economies. Volta's pile represented the next frontier of power. While steam ruled the early 19th century, electricity was beginning to rise. Within decades, discoveries in electromagnetism, inspired by Volta's current, would unleash telegraphs, motors, dynamos, and lighting systems. Born in an era of philosophy, when experiments were small and personal, dying in an era of industry, when science was becoming a global force for economic and social transformation, a bridge between natural philosophy and modern science. Volta also marks the transition from natural philosophy to modern science. In the 18th century, natural philosophers studied nature broadly, mixing physics, chemistry, and metaphysics. By the 19th century, science was becoming specialized chemistry, physics, biology, and engineering diverged into distinct disciplines. Volta lived on that border. His work on gases, electricity, and instruments blurred categories, yet his battery provided the tools for specialization. Chemistry gained electrolysis, physics gained electromagnetism, and biology gained bioelectricity, all branching from his pile. He was, in a sense, the last of the great universal experimenters and the first of the modern specialists. Volta's personality also made him a bridge. He was both traditional, rooted in Catholic values, respectful of authority, cautious in speculation, progressive, embracing experimentation, challenging old assumptions, and daring to create new instruments. This balance allowed him to move comfortably between old aristocracies and new scientific societies, between Napoleon's empire and the Republic of Letters. If Benjamin Franklin symbolized the Enlightenment's daring spirit, and Michael Faraday symbolized the Industrial Revolution's inventive energy, then Volta symbolized the link between them. He was the careful craftsman of knowledge whose invention laid the rails for the train of modern science to run upon. Without Volta, the leap from sparks to circuits, from curiosity to civilization, might have taken far longer. Unlike some scientists whose fame remained regional, Volta's reputation quickly crossed borders. His pile was simple to construct, and within months of his 1,800 announcement, scientists across Europe were replicating it. That ease of reproduction ensured that Volta's discovery was global almost from the start. Whereas Galileo's telescope or Newton's prism experiments had required rare instruments, the voltaic pile could be built from everyday materials, copper, zinc, and cloth. Its accessibility meant that Volta's name and invention became household knowledge among educated classes everywhere. In Britain, the voltaic pile found a fertile home at the Royal Institution in London. There, Humphrey Davy used massive batteries to conduct groundbreaking chemical experiments. Davy's giant voltaic apparatus, consisting of thousands of plates, allowed him to isolate elements such as sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. These discoveries dramatically expanded the periodic table, confirming Volta's pile as a tool of chemistry's golden age. Volta's reputation in Britain soared. The Royal Society praised his invention, and British newspapers marveled at the speed with which his pile unlocked new secrets of matter. France had been Volta's greatest stage. His demonstration before Napoleon in 1801 cemented his fame in Paris. But beyond that symbolic triumph, French scientists eagerly applied his invention. André Marie Ampère studied the relationship between electricity and magnetism, laying the groundwork for electromagnetism. Joseph Gay-Lussac and Louis-Jacques Thénard used batteries to conduct electrochemical research. The French Académie des Sciences held up Volta as one of Europe's greatest minds, a symbol of reason and progress. Napoleon himself used Volta as a propaganda tool, showcasing him as proof of Italy's genius and Europe's dominance in science. In German lands, Volta's invention inspired not only scientists, but also philosophers. The Romantic movement, with thinkers such as Goethe and Schelling, seized upon electricity as a metaphor for the unity of nature. Meanwhile, German physicists such as Johann Wilhelm Ritter expanded upon Volta's work, discovering the ultraviolet region of the spectrum while experimenting with electrical currents. The pile thus became a tool of both scientific precision and philosophical speculation. Across the Atlantic, the young United States also embraced Volta's discovery. Benjamin Franklin had already made electricity a subject of fascination in America, but it was Volta who provided a practical instrument. American universities and private experimenters built piles to demonstrate electricity in classrooms and parlors. For a nation forging its identity as a land of progress, Volta's invention became a symbol of modernity, proof that science was a global language uniting old world and new. A global reputation by the 19th century, by the time of his death in 1827, Alessandro Volta's name was recognized around the world. His invention had transformed chemistry in Britain. It had driven physics and electromagnetism in France and Germany. It had inspired literature, philosophy, and culture far beyond Italy. And in 1881, more than 50 years after his passing, the international community ensured that his name would never fade. They declared the volt, V, the unit of electrical potential. Volta's international influence reflects something deeper. His invention was not bound to one culture, one nation, or one ideology. It was universal. Anyone, anywhere, could stack metals and cloths and produce a spark of current. In this way, Volta's pile became a democratic instrument of science, accessible and transformative across borders. It was, in truth, one of the first global scientific revolutions. When Volta unveiled his pile in 1800, he provided scientists with something they had never possessed before, a continuous, controllable current of electricity. This was more than a convenience, it was a revolution. Suddenly, electricity could be studied not in fleeting sparks, but in sustained flows. That single shift opened the door to discoveries that would transform physics. Where Volta had provided the instrument, others would now uncover the laws of nature it revealed. Hans Christian Ørsted. Electricity creates magnetism. In 1820, Danish physicist Hans Christian Ørsted made a stunning discovery while lecturing to his students. He noticed that a compass needle deflected when placed near a wire carrying current from a voltaic pile. This was the first proof that electricity and magnetism were linked. Until then, they had been seen as entirely separate forces. Ørsted's experiment, enabled only by Volta's invention, unified two realms of physics into the new field of electromagnetism. André Marie Ampère, The Laws of Electrodynamics. Almost immediately, French scientist André Marie-Ampère expanded upon Ørsted's finding. Using voltaic piles, he demonstrated that electric currents exert forces upon one another, formulating the mathematical laws of electrodynamics. Ampère-Ray's work provided the quantitative backbone of electromagnetism. His name, like Volta's, lives on in every circuit, the ampere-A, the unit of electric current. Without Volta's steady current, Ampère-Ray's laws could never have been uncovered. Michael Faraday, the great experimenter. In England, Michael Faraday took Volta's legacy to new heights. Beginning as a bookbinder's apprentice, Faraday became fascinated with electricity and built piles of his own. Using current from batteries, he performed groundbreaking experiments. In 1831, he discovered electromagnetic induction, that moving a magnet near a coil could produce an electric current. This principle became the foundation of the electric generator, which would one day power cities. Faraday also introduced the concepts of electrical and magnetic fields, giving physics new ways to describe forces. His discoveries transformed Volta's pile from a laboratory curiosity into the seed of the modern electrical age. Volta's invention had set off a chain reaction. Volta gave the battery. Ørsted revealed the link between current and magnetism. Ampère laid down the laws of electrodynamics. Faraday discovered induction and envisioned fields. Later, James Clerk Maxwell unified electricity, magnetism, and light into a single framework. All of it began with the modest pile of zinc and copper that Volta stacked in Pavia. The discovery of electromagnetism was more than scientific. It reshaped humanity's relationship with nature. For the first time, people realized that unseen forces could be not only observed, but harnessed. The voltaic pile had not only produced electricity, it had produced a new worldview. Energy was no longer a mystery of fire and wind, but a universal principle governed by laws and open to human mastery. In this sense, Volta was the patriarch of a dynasty of discovery. He had provided the first steady current, and with it, his intellectual descendants revealed entire continents of knowledge. Every time a motor spins, every time a generator lights a city, every time a phone charges, the lineage is clear. Volta to Ørsted to Ampère to Faraday to Maxwell to the modern world. Alessandro Volta's story is not merely the tale of a scientist who stacked metals and cloth to create a current. It is the story of how one man's patience, skepticism, and humility changed the very course of human history. From the flicker of a frog's leg to the glow of modern cities, his legacy stretches across centuries, carried in every wire, every circuit, every battery that hums silently beneath the fabric of our lives. Yet beyond the volts and piles, there lies a more human lesson. Volta teaches us that doubt is not weakness, it is the seed of discovery. That steady persistence, not sudden genius, can reveal nature's deepest truths, and that one quiet life, lived with curiosity and balance, can ignite revolutions far beyond its time. Still, as we charge our devices, drive electric cars, or gaze at the glitter of satellites orbiting Earth, we might ask, what would Volta think if he could see the empire of electricity his pile has unleashed? Would he marvel, or would he caution us? Would he see in our glowing world the fulfillment of his vision, or the beginning of questions yet unasked? Perhaps that is the truest legacy of Alessandro Volta, that his spark continues not in the answers he gave, but in the questions he left behind. And so the current flows on, across time, across lives, waiting for the next hand, the next mind, to follow where it leads.